Thanks everybody. Just want to say first of all, welcome to all of you. It's been a terrible day and a not much better night, but thank you all for coming out. And I hope you all will get something of value out of this forum tonight. We thought it was worthwhile, the We Live Here movement, with the council elections coming up later in the year, to have this forum so you can actually get to meet some of the councillors and actually have a little bit of a say and find out what's going on and how you might get involved more in the council elections. The format, as you can see, is a panel discussion. I'll go on to the apologies later, but there was going to be a presentation by the Lord Mayor, but unfortunately he pulled out this afternoon. And his deputy also pulled out this afternoon. So we rearranged the program so it will be an entirely a panel discussion, but I think with the people we have here tonight, I think we'll have a pretty lively discussion. But I'll introduce them in a few minutes. But the panel discussion, there will be some Q&A from the audience, and then later on there will be refreshments. There will be some closing remarks and refreshments in the community room outside. So, to begin, well, here's the list of apologies. We sent the invitation out to all the councillors, and we've had apologies from all of them except Councillor Louis, who was here. I'm not sure whether he's still here or he's left, and the 4 councillors you see here. All the rest were apologies, and we also had an apology from Alan Sandell. But we're very delighted to have the 4 here. Now, this forum tonight has been organised by the nuts and bolts of the We Live Here movement at the moment. That's myself and Russ Lisselson, Marshall Dell, Selena Marshall and Graham Brown. Now, how do I go back one? Now, the panel. From my right, we're not quite in the order, but it doesn't really matter tonight. We'll just be wherever you want to speak, you do. When we had a few more people coming, we decided to parent this convention to ask them to speak in alphabetical order, but we won't bother to do that tonight. So at the end, on my right, on my left here, is Councillor Richard Foster, who's the chair of People City. Next to him is Councillor Jackie Watts, who's chair of Knowledge City, and next to her is Councillor Ken Ong, who's the chair of Planning, and at the end is Councillor Cathy Oak, who's chair of Transport. And the moderator for tonight's panel discussion, on my right here, is Michael Kennedy. Now, Michael Kennedy, some of you may know, he was born in the City of Melbourne, began his education in the City of Melbourne, lives in the City of Melbourne and works in the City of Melbourne. So eminently suitable for being involved in this tonight. Michael is, among other things, chair of the Coalition of Residents and Business Associations in Melbourne, or CORBA as it's the acronym. which represents over 20 diverse resident and business associations across the City of Melbourne. Of interest to those attending tonight is that in a previous life, Michael was responsible for creating the Owners Corporation Act and significant sections of the Residential Tenancies Act, and I'm not sure whether any of you here have been involved in the review of the Act that Michael was responsible for writing. So that's the panel and the moderator, and just to get the ball rolling, what we did at the beginning, when I invited all the councillors to come, we put a few questions to them about what we'd like, what was council doing for residents. So that was a number of questions, or a few questions we asked them. We also followed that up with some questions that were pre-submitted by residents, some who are here tonight and some who are not. So they'll all be coming up in the mix over the next little while, comprising the questions on notice. And following that, there'll be a question and answer session. But I think at this point in time, I think I might hand over to Michael to take over proceedings from here on in. Thank you, Michael.
Good evening. Good evening, Richard, Jackie, Ken, Kathy, and thank you, Barbara. So the first question we have is, what role should residents have in the City of Melbourne, and how may they become more involved? So, in posing this question, I'll first say, one is that this is meant to be politically neutral, and that everyone should, if they have any other questions later on, speak in the appropriate manner and treat the councillors with due respect. But we'll start on the right, with Richard, who's well known for being on the right.
That's used to me.
So Richard, what role should residents have in the City of Melbourne, and how may they become more involved?
What an opening, and the laughter coming from the left of the panel is almost deafening. Thank you.
We might be sitting in the wrong
Thanks very much. We might be sitting in the wrong order after all. Sorry, the role of residents. I think residents already have a role. I don't think it's about creating one for them. I think residents do have a role in the City of Melbourne. It's how best to extract the most out of residents in terms of their input about what they want to see in a city, rather than whether or not they're involved. I think they are involved. How we can do that? Well, I think there's a few things that the City of Melbourne has already done, but a few things that we're yet to do, and a lot that we can do better. The things that we've already done, I mean, we've had the People's Panel, which was, as far as we know, a world first, and it was enormously effective, bringing together so many different people from so many different backgrounds to contribute their views about how they see a city moving forward. And it wasn't so much about what the city's like today or what they appreciate about what the city's been. It's about where they want to see the city years from now. And I think that's one of the real things that residents need to be a part of. If you're going to live here for any period of time, surely you want to be involved in what the city's going to look like years from now while you're here. I think one of the meaningful ways that we can start doing more of that is by being in places like this. It's disappointing to see that about less than half of our number have turned up tonight. And I think that's noteworthy. It means that the people who are genuinely engaging with residents are the people who are sitting in front of you tonight. So I think it's as much a message for current councillors and aspiring councillors or candidates that are looking to the October election and thinking about running. Be well and truly prepared to engage with your residents. Residents are going to find it very, very hard to have the input that they deserve if you're not prepared to sit down and listen to them. So I think everyone here tonight should be congratulated for being here, simply because there are so many who chose not to. I think another way that residents can be involved is by participating in the scheduled meetings, and we need to publicise those better. We need to make them work better so that residents can be involved. We have 3 meetings most months, 2 meetings in the Future Melbourne Committee and 1 council meeting. And residents, and indeed the public generally, are encouraged to attend those and to be a part of those. We've introduced public questions at the start of those meetings and at the end of the Future Melbourne Committee meetings and at the end of them. So in 2 meetings every month you have the opportunity to be up there. Very few residents take advantage of that, and I think it's an opportunity missed. We're there to answer your questions, we're there to be held accountable. I think the more residents that take advantage of those periods before and at the end of meetings, the better. I think we need to hear from you. We need to know what your concerns are as a panel of councillors, not just the ones that turn up to residents' meetings. So anyway, look, I'm chewing up time, so I might...
So you've got another
might
30
hand back-
seconds.
Oh, another 30, gee, it's waiting right, I was waiting for a bell to ring. Well, I suppose the only other thing I'd add is getting to know you, councillors, as much as we want to get to know you, get to know us. The website's available to everyone. Hone in on the areas of interest to you and come and see us, you know, especially the ones who are out there seeing you. We're welcoming of that. We want to hear from you. So give us your views, give us your opinions, because we're there to respond to them. And if we're not, frankly, we shouldn't be in the job.
Thank you.
Well, some of you know, but for those of you who don't know, the reason I'm on council in the first place, I joined because I was a part of the Coalition of Residents and Business Associations, and I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't satisfied at all that the community was being listened to. So one of the actions I took is one of the actions you can take. You can actually stand for council to get your views up there. But that's probably not attractive to all of you. But what you can do is exactly what Richard said, make your voices known. It is really important that you step up at council meetings and tell us what's going on. It is really important if you see items on the agenda, which you can actually have a look at every week on the website. It's really important if you can listen to the recording now and see what went on and who said what. You don't like it, ring that councillor, contact them, and make your views known. We've got this website, Participate Melbourne, that is supposed to be an online opportunity for you to get in there and say your piece. Personally, I like these kinds of meetings better. If you like the remote town hall, take advantage of every one of these meetings that you see happening. There's really no point in being part of this or trying to be part of this city if you don't actually step up and share your views. I was with someone recently who was making a joke, and they said, everyone's entitled to my opinion, they said. They didn't want to hold back, and I think that's really important. Everyone's entitled to my opinion, and you're entitled to share yours.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. I'm not going to repeat what my fellow councillors have already said. A lot of the information's already covered in terms of the involvement of the residents in what happens in the city and engagement with the City of Melbourne. What I'd like to add is from my own portfolio, I see a lot of this engagement regularly. The Chair Planning has a portfolio that I guess affects a lot of people. Anytime a development application, whether it's in the central city, or it's in South Yarra or East Melbourne, or Kensington, Carlton, North Melbourne, South Bank, people get concerned. People get concerned because it impacts on them, and there's other questions that come on that. I think it's great that the City of Melbourne has all its application information available online. Notice is given for all those non-capital city zones, and that's when the residents and other groups can get involved and voice the concerns. My role is to make sure that all of those are looked at, and then we will do a technical evaluation of all those that are raised according to what the planning schemes allow and don't allow. And normally, I would say that the City of Melbourne professionals are very good. Other occasions, people contact me directly about various things in there. And as a councillor, we don't know everything, but we have an organization of professionals. And that's how we use the professionals within the organization, the engineering departments, the community services department, the aged care, the child care, and a whole lot of other groups that have the special knowledge, and that's where we act as a role of a facilitator, a conduit. And I think that's where I encourage the people. And if you want more information, as said by the others, our council website is constantly getting updated, and more information is available to you, and you can always get on and put your comments in or email everyone in council, all the councillors, the Lord Mayor, the Deputy.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Barbara, and all the organisers for tonight. I, like my colleagues, think that these meetings are really important, and I'm very impressed by how many people have turned up. I'm not sure if we're going to be answering the questions that were the other questions about the electoral system in the City of Melbourne, but my response to the first question, what role should residents have in the City of Melbourne, my response is actually far greater and more, and if we could just get rid of the gerrymander of 2 business votes to 1, then wouldn't it be great? We might actually have more residents. And I can answer we were given a lot of questions about the electoral system, and if we're given time, I'm sure many of us could go into that in greater detail, but I think that in particular is a frustration to us residents. Resident councillors at the City of Melbourne are far fewer than any other council in Australia because of this rule. So there are more councillors on the City of Melbourne who don't live in the municipality who are on council, and I think that is of importance. And no disrespect to you, Ken, because I know you're incredibly hardworking and very involved in other communities within the city, but I think that living in the municipality is really important, and I can't encourage you enough to stand up and get elected. And if you're already as slick as you are already, this branding and the work that you're doing from now on, I'll be surprised if you don't get a councillor on the City of Melbourne. I really hope that you do.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, the other thing that I was going to say, and it hasn't been mentioned, a really important thing that you can get involved in right now is the current budget and action plan. So last Thursday, we endorsed the draft budget and activities, and you'll see that there's a range of things going on that we put forward for the whole of the municipality, but there are specific activities for the Docklands. You need to read those and determine whether are they what you're interested in, should we be doing more. And on the 16th of June, there'll be a special council meeting where we'll be able to hear submissions from anyone about the budget, and lo and behold, if you turn up, we have very few submissions. Those that do, we often change things as a result. Not promising anything, but there are things in there that you should look at. So I think I've got them here if you want to see them, but budget is really important, and you've got a few minutes.
Question. If you have any questions, hold them to the end and we will work our way through them. The second question is, how can more residents be encouraged to nominate for council, and what steps are needed to ensure that residents are on the electoral roll? We'll start from the left.
Councillor Ken has, this is all online, but Ken has brought you some hard copy, standforyourcouncil.com.au, so some information about how, what does it mean to stand for council, and all of the, the technical specificity, the technical details. And there's a candidate information session on the 30th of May at Town Hall, so there's some information there. I know that Jackie will probably talk about some of the activities that we're involved in increasing diversity. I'm very interested in not only increasing more residents on the council, but obviously young people and women. We have so few women elected in local government in Australia and Victoria. It's only at 32%. We need more women. And sorry, Jackie, you can talk more about that because I know you're a very big champion there. In terms of getting more residents on the electoral roll, again, in the bugbear with the gerrymander that we have, there is the business roll that the City of Melbourne spent a lot of time and money making sure that all the businesses are accurate, up to date and on the roll so that they're well represented with their 2 votes. Residents, it's taken from the state and federal electoral rolls, and as we know, it's a very transient population in the City of Melbourne. There are a lot of students, there are a lot of new citizens, there are not a lot of new community members that may not be on the roll. So if you know anyone that fits that category, anyone who's a student or just moved in, get them registered on the electoral roll in the City of Melbourne this week. Make sure they're on before the October elections so that they can be counted. Otherwise, they might be registered somewhere else. Right, moving on.
Thank you, Katie. This particular question, there's no one stopping anyone within the City of Melbourne. If you're on the electoral roll, you can run for council. Many people are always encouraged to. I think the last election there were 55 candidates for the 9 positions on the councillor tickets. Of course, it's quite a fierce competition. So go through the material, think carefully how you can run for council. There are also some rules which you need to look in the VEC. The VEC website talks about what the rules are to be eligible to run for councils. I've attended a couple of forums where some misleading information were provided by some people to the audience, and I had to pull up the actual document from the website to make it clear who is eligible to run or to even vote, because there's a there's a process out there that we can sometimes get it wrong. And some people then complain that they can't vote, but then they actually don't qualify. In terms of comments, which comes to question 5, the history of the City of Melbourne is there's been very few residents, and there's been mostly businesses. Now, we have seen in the last 4 or 5 years that the average annual increase in residents within the City of Melbourne is about 6,000. So that increase in the last 5 or 6 years is slowly beginning to change the balance in terms of the actual ratepayer base. So all I can say is that, just to answer the question, maybe in a few years when the balance changes further, I think it's easier to move and change the gerrymander. The current situation is there's probably a pushback based on the actual dollars itself. If you look at it, I look at things from an objective perspective, and as the population grows in the city, I think that situation will change in the future. At the moment, it is what it is.
Thank you.
So I've got a couple of tips for you, I think. Those of you who don't feel inclined to stand up can still have a great deal of influence in this council, the next council. You can approach any of the candidates and you can help shape the agenda. If you don't want to be the front runner, you can certainly feed the information in and make sure what you think is important is being discussed. Even those teams who are not successful, the agenda can be shaped. And so I really encourage you to think about what's important to you. And if you don't feel like running yourself, make sure your views are part of those who are going to be running. So you should do that. Now, I've got a bit of a track record of banging on about electoral reform endlessly for the last 15 years in the City of Melbourne, and we are getting somewhere. Now, unfortunately, the current review that's underway with the Local Government Act and the City of Melbourne Act, reforms won't be out, which is annoying me. They won't be out by the time of the next election. But what is happening, they're tinkering around the edges with changes to the VEC. That's currently happening. Now, I've made a submission and a number of the other resident groups have made a submission too, and it's on the website. If you can't find it, let me know and I can point you in the right direction. Yes, we have a gerrymander in this city, but yes, we have a lot of evidence that this is going to be changing, and there's a lot of people feeling, as I do, and most people on this panel do, that it's long overdue reform. So this is not going to be the election we can actually fix things entirely, but we can certainly tinker and make it better. Now, as for the business of actually registering, it's really up to all of you to some extent to make sure those around you know to register. I see Shane Scanlon here, and I know through the CBD News, he's giving you very good, and Docklands News I should say, is giving you very good information about how very powerful your voice can be if you get on board with this. So do try.
Thank you, Jackie.
Well, thank you. There's probably not much left to cover, I don't think, but I'd raise just a couple of quick points for you. I think Jackie raised a very good point. You know, not everybody wants to be a councillor, and you can understand why that might be. So if you don't want to, if it's not for you, then it doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to have a say with the councillors who are there, as I said earlier. So it's a really important point to make. The other thing I'd like to bring up is, a lot of people say to me, well, why would you want to be a councillor? Why do you want to go into politics? Isn't it just painful? Well, yeah, it kind of can be sometimes. We all take a hit every now and then, and sometimes it's deserved too. So, no, it's not all fun and games. But the question remains, so why do you do it? You do it because I know every one of us here would agree with this, that you get your hands on the levers that matter to you, the levers of things that you want to improve, the very reason that you stood in the first place. We're all passionate about various things on council. And the main reason that we all have made the commitment to go into it, and probably a number of personal sacrifices along the way, is because we feel it's important to make a change on some of the key things that we find most important. And those are things that are often in response to issues that other people are raising with us, and they're things that we may have held passionately close to us for quite a period of time. So that's the good thing about being a councillor. That's the good thing, that each month, each week, each year, you get to look back and you get to notice a lot of the things that most other people probably wouldn't notice. Some of the things that we've been able to influence or change might only be important to 5 or 10 people, but they're incredibly important. Others are important to thousands. So those are the things that I'd encourage you to turn your attention towards as well. The things that are important to you and the things that may motivate you to stand.
Thank you, Richard. So, next question. Is it fair that businesses are worth 2 votes and residents 1? Postal votes versus attendance voting also acts against residents. I point out I didn't write the question, so forgive if there's any bias, it's not mine. So we'll start with the right, and Richard, seeing he's holding the microphone.
Sure.
Start.
Is it fair that businesses are worth 2 votes and residents 1? No. Come on, no. Of course it's not. I think Ken raised a good point earlier, and that is the changing in Melbourne's makeup. It's been changing for some time, and it continues to change. The residential numbers are only heading north. They're not going to backtrack now. You remember, back in the 80s and 90s, we used to call Melbourne Donut City, didn't we? Because no one hung around in the city. You'd come into work, and there was really no life here. You'd head off back to the suburbs. You wouldn't spend any time in Melbourne. And there was probably a good reason for that. It wasn't a great place to be. There wasn't a lot going on, really, compared to what we have today. So the reason that people are starting to live in the city and making it their home, their permanent home, is because there is more going on. The city has changed, and it feeds each other. Residents then create a community. You can't have a real community without residents in it, and that's what we have today. Thousands of residents coming into the city every year. There's a damn good reason to be here. We can't expect the community to sit down and be happy when they can't have a meaningful say in what their local government's doing. So really, I take on Ken's point that the numbers are gradually shifting, but I think, look, the weight is sufficient. I think we're there. I think it's time to say, yes, of course, give residents an equal vote. And as for attendance voting, look, I'm a fan of an optional postal. I think, like we run most elections across the country, we have optional postal voting, and I think that ought to be an option here for us as well. But really, for attendance voting to be the norm, there is no greater way to activate and encourage a community to be involved in local government than asking them to turn up and vote for who they want to be representing them. So there's my 2 answers, and I'm dying to hear what Councillor Watts has to say.
Naturally, I'm in favour of attendance with optional postal voting. We have a most peculiar system here, and it's certainly not appropriate for a city such as ours. It's also become very expensive. You've all noted, haven't you, the increased cost of Australia Post. I mean, the way this election is going, it's really going to be a very, very difficult one. We're 38 square kilometres, within cooey of somewhere. We could have 3 voting booths in the city and it would cover most of us. And of course, the 60% of our electorate, which is offshore interstate, can continue to vote postally if they so wish. But there's a very important thing that goes on when you turn up at a booth and you are who you say you are and you get to vote. It's a time-honoured, successful engagement with our democracy, and that's the most important thing we can have at a local government level, in my view.
Thank you, Jackie. I will put an alternative view. This is a residents' forum. However, again, I look at the reality of what we have in the city of Melbourne. We do have a lot of businesses, and for those of you who are in business, whether you're in retail or cafes and others within the city, many have said that they just do not have time to be able to do an attendance vote. So, yes, they will do postal voting. Whether the future is a mixture of both attendance and postal. We also know from, I guess all the candidates know from the list of voters within the city of Melbourne that we get as candidates in the last election, there is a significant proportion of interstate and overseas owners of properties who are actually the ratepayers. The students who actually rent their apartments actually are not eligible to vote. Now that is according to the VEC side, unless they are already registered in the electoral system. Yes, if they're already registered, but there's 50,000 overseas students living in the city of Melbourne. Those who are permanent residents can, those who are not cannot. So it's actually, all right, we can debate that, but I've looked at the VEC carefully on this particular issue of who is eligible. And in terms of postal, the new rules that were suggested for those who can't make it, and last time we had 6.4% that were gets late.
30 seconds.
115,000 votes in the whole of Victoria missed the deadline. They have now proposed to extend it by 9 days after, due to the fact that Australia Post now has become super slow snail mail. So I've received letters 2 to 3 weeks after it's posted. So hopefully this will address any issues that people think that they be posted 3 days before it won't get there and it's not counted. The rules have been are being improved to try to make sure it's fair. I still think that we have some way to go because the way that the city's makeup is quite different.
Thank you, Ken. Kathy?
This argument that because there are not so many residents, therefore it means that they should only have one and business have two, I have no idea what the logic is behind that, and apologies, but there are 88,000 plus residents in the City of Melbourne, adult residents within the City of Melbourne who can vote, but only 44,000 of those voted at the last council election. This is because the residential role, isn't as accurately manicured as the business role, which I mentioned before. And as I said before, I do not support that either. I don't. Even if there were less residents and there are businesses, I still don't get why they should have 2 votes than 1. It just doesn't make sense. So there's no logic, absolutely no justification as to why they should have 2 votes instead of 1. In terms of the postal and attendance, absolutely it should be attendance. I mean, even though there are only 2 municipalities in all of Victoria that actually do have attendance, I think only 2, almost all of them are postal now. But of course you can post your vote if you can't attend in person. The Docklands is a case in point as to why we need attendance voting. Unless you've got a lot of money and you're going to spend $300,000, $400,000 on an election campaign, it is very, very difficult to speak to residents when you're in towers behind closed doors. We can't go and knock on the doors. We can't, you can stand at the buzzer and ring your buzzers. It's very difficult to actually, as much as we try to door knock in the Docklands, we can have community stalls and we can get out and obviously talk. But in terms of getting how to vote information into residents' hands for a full democratic process, so you can understand who you're voting for, very difficult if it's only postal and non-attendance.
Thank you, Kate. Question 4. Consumer
Yes.
Affairs, local councils, owners corporations. Who should be responsible for dealing with short-term letting in residential buildings? A highly contentious issue, I'm told, too. Don't blame me for it.
Highly contentious, and it's ridiculous that it's still on the agenda. And like my other colleagues, I enjoy being on council, and there are a lot of things you can get done, but there are a lot of things that take a long time. And this has been on the agenda, I know, down not only in the Docklands but in other parts of the municipality for a long time. The issue of short-term, short-stay apartments, especially pseudo-service apartments in most of the residential apartments. I know it's a big issue. It's very disappointing that the state government appears to have passed the buck back to councils and have not seen the merits of using owners corporation regulation or the building code to try and put some regulation around this issue. It's very disappointing, and to not even respond to the panel yet or let it to be debated in Parliament. I think that it is an issue that the state needs to take hold of. It's a statewide issue. There are other parts of the state that I'm sure would like to have some control over this as well. But sure, it is a big issue in this municipality. And yes, the City of Melbourne does need to play a role. And if we do need to make a decision around regulation or zoning, then I think that we should as a municipality. But we haven't, it hasn't come to council yet because the panel report is with the state government and they haven't responded necessarily. But I think the Owners Corporation Act and the Building Code certainly have the role to play, but that's not within our purview to change that. That's at the state government level. What we can do is look at cities like, I understand this was spoken at your last forum, but certainly look at examples like in San Francisco where you can put, and again I'd be interested in views from people in the room who know more about this than me, but I know that the San Francisco model whereby it's not a complete ban, where genuine Airbnb rentals on a short-term basis is possible, but certainly not pseudo-serviced apartments where it's pretty much just rented out all the time to random people turning up all the time. So that's my views. I'm not sure if that answered anything. But
Thank you, Kathy. Ken?
not an easy topic. I think for some of you might remember, it was brought to my attention 4 years ago, the Watergate apartments. Council and I, on behest from myself, started a lot of investigation into this issue. We have found a lot of things that we are powerless to do. But I'll just go back to then. And the council decided we would take one approach. Class 2 versus Class 3 buildings. Because the short-term service apartments are run as businesses in residential towers, therefore their building code applications were not applied. We took that to the BBA, the Building Appeals Board, who agreed with us. But then a number of operators in Docklands, the bigger ones, took us to the Supreme Court, which put aside the BBA decision and referred it back to the BBA. So the council's been working with the BBA to try to address this situation. And now the only thing that we could do is that whoever rents out their apartment for short term needs to put in fire alarms systems and information boards on the back of the doors, which still doesn't really achieve building code 2, level 2. And then at last week at the Residence 3000 exercise, we had a couple of people from the owners who either one is who manages buildings and the other one's a lawyer. Even if a new development here, where the owners corporation put in rules like you cannot hire your apartment out for less than 3 months, it does not stand up in court. So it has to go back to the original act. Whoever put the act together, we never envisaged these things to happen. It has happened. We now have to go back and rework the act, and that is not an easy exercise. That's all I can say. The council has very limited power. In fact, I think we spent a lot of time and money and feel quite powerless in addressing a problem that is real.
Thank you, Ken. Jackie.
So I think Ken's explained and Kath has explained the complexity of all of this, but I would disagree to an extent. It seems to me that one thing council can do is to continue to advocate for the laws to change. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that laws change, and I do know that the council is in a position to advocate for things because we have in the past. I noticed and I commend the We Live Here people for putting various examples before the Lord Mayor. I have a document here that was sent along and referred by We Live Here, sent to our Lord Mayor, and was talking about the way it's handled in Sydney and Woolhara. There are things we can do. We seem not to have been able to do them yet. It's not my strongest point, but I keep seeing it from the residents' point of view. I mean, it's the lived experience, isn't it? Of you having these businesses right up against you and impacting on where you live and the costs that you have to incur. It's not right, and progress has to be made. It seems to have, well, the tail is wagging the dog, and that isn't the way it should be.
Leaves me with very little to add. I think, just picking up on Ken's point though, I appreciate that explanation. It's actually good to have the Chair of Planning here to talk through some of these things with some first-hand knowledge of how the legislation works. I think though it brings me to Jackie's point, and that is, you know, when we're hearing so much from residents, it's pretty hard to ignore, and I think we'd be ignoring it at our peril. I wouldn't want to be living on a floor where people are coming and going from an apartment doing all manner of things in a short stay arrangement. We've heard the stories, we know what happens. The question is, what can we do about it? So to take up Jackie's point, I think our role, our main role, is advocacy. We've done it before, we've done it pretty effectively. A while ago I called for all-night public transport in Melbourne, and now look. You know, these things can happen. So I think we've got to take a strong and committed advocacy approach on behalf of residents who put us in these positions. We've been listening pretty well. But we do need to take the battle up now to the state government and make sure that the legislation is such that we can act locally, because it's not going to be just Melbourne either. I mean, this issue is going to creep outwards from here. If we can't address it as the capital city that we are, then we're really letting the side down. And it's pretty disappointing too to look north of the border and see reasonable precedents being set. I mean, I don't like that feeling at all. We should be the ones doing that. We have the capacity to do it. So I think from here that needs to be a strong focus of any councillor that comes in from into the next council, and indeed those that remain here now. It needs to become a strong focus. We need to advocate to the state government for meaningful legislative change that gives us the levers we need to give residents a better outcome.
Before we proceed,
But just to clarify, because there is a bill in Parliament waiting to be debated on this issue, and it needs to be, but just also to clarify from what I was saying, I wasn't saying that we didn't have a role, I was saying that actually, if we can regulate, let's regulate. So
I know.
just, so, you know.
So Ken Ong has asked for a minute to speak on a...
Yes, thank you, Michael. The 2 minutes, especially in a complicated topic, wasn't enough. What I'll say to you is this. There's a report, panel report, which included the manager of planning and building from the City of Melbourne and the Tourism, Victorian Accommodation, Docklands Community Association, Holiday Rental Industry, Owners COP Victoria, that was presented to the Minister back earlier this year, Minister of Consumer Affairs and the Minister for Planning, 2 ministers. And this was released July 27, 2015. There were 13 options proposed in this reform to be going into a revision of the Owners Corporation Act to make providers of short-term accommodation responsible to a limited extent for parties and apartments they rent and any other damage they cause, and to empower Owners Corporation to deal with the problems using existing mechanisms under Owners Corporation Act. But we all know that the existing mechanisms are not strong enough. The City of Melbourne's recommendation, which we put pressure on and that we support as option 2, self-regulation by industry through implementation of the Holiday Rental Industry Association's Rental Code of Conduct, or option 3, alternative dispute resolution and mediation options to manage tensions between residents and short-stay apartment owners. Option 6, amending the Owners Corporation Act 2006 to make apartment owners liable for conduct of their short-stay occupants. Option 13, empowering VCAT to prohibit the use of apartments for short-stay accommodation. The Council's position is that we're supportive of options 2, 3 and 13, which is the dispute resolution, VCAT and self-regulation, and then noted that option 6 is a good one in principle, but it does have some disadvantages, and I'm not sure what they are. So I just thought I should read out this from our own council officers as to where things stand. The ministers, as Cathy was saying, and there's a bill. There's a bill, but no decision yet.
Thank you, Ken. Question 5, which we'll be starting with Cathy. Differential rates for residential, excluding service departments, rooming houses, etc., rooming houses versus non-residential, proposed by council. Is this workable? Having dealt with the question, is it workable?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is just talking about a differential
Basically,
rate of residential for business,
should there
which
be,
is what we're talking about.
does the
before,
residential,
so-
the differential residential rate
Dollars in the
apply
cent,
to
cents in a dollar.
service departments, i.e. what we've just been talking about? Or should it apply?
So it doesn't at the moment, but I was intrigued by the question to find out whether it's possible. So I will take that on notice, because yeah, there is obviously a differential, and businesses versus residential pay different rates. But as to the definition and the inclusion of rooming houses, or sorry, not rooming houses, service departments in that definition, yeah, that's something that I'll follow up.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sort of in a similar position to Cathy. When I look at the differential rates, what we currently have in the City of Melbourne is 2, business and residential. And it's basically the cents in the dollar. But rooming
You wrote the
houses,
question, maybe there's
Yeah.
a clarification on the question. He was asking whether service departments could be included as businesses, or
That's
just saying that
right.
they are.
You can shift short stays into commercial.
Yeah.
So that the word residential applies to people who live there.
Yes.
People who live there more than 30 days.
But yes,
I
but
don't
the
think
short
it's-
stay area.
Okay.
So
Short
service
stays.
departments are businesses, but you're talking about, but if
Completely,
it's,
yeah.
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 Well, no,
Yep.
so the service departments become commercial rates.
Yes, that's right.
Can we charge commercial rates, or can you charge commercial
For the
rates?
short stays.
For short stays, because it's the hip pocket that's going to count.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I don't have the answer. I know that the big service apartments are actually treated as commercial. But these people who run short stay 2 or 3 apartments on a website, we'll take that question on board.
We'll send a collection.
Hopefully they don't take us to the Supreme Court again.
And I'm not sure where Airbnb fits into this either.
No, that's not, that's the individual house.
But we don't know, do we? We don't know whether there are sort of Airbnbs handled collectively. I'm not sure of that.
I think the recent court case said that Airbnb is not a sublet.
I'll just add a couple of quick comments. I can provide a little bit of clarity. I think to the best of my knowledge, if you were to include serviced apartments and other short stays as so your Airbnb type scenario as businesses, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. Bearing in mind that Airbnb doesn't own property. So really, you know, we can excise Airbnb to a large extent as a corporate entity from the conversation. We're really just dealing with how these apartments are being used and how we don't want them used. So yeah, I don't see any reason why you couldn't. It's the Act only limits us insofar as discriminating on the type of business that you're running. So if we're simply saying we want to include them as a business, I don't see what would prohibit, legislatively, what would prohibit that. But yeah, I think it's a really good question to raise, and yeah, we'll just take that take the clarity on notice.
The differential rate is decided at the budget process, right? You know, I just said we have a budget process underway at the moment, so we'll get the information before the 16th of June, so that we can at least maybe or maybe not, I have no idea, respond to it. Yeah. That's the
Yeah,
draft.
draft. So that's what we're inviting comment on, so.
Now
By all
we'll
means.
now get you information by the end of this week, so
Yeah.
that then you've got time for
I
the
think the
budget.
question for us is that this is a very specific type of use, which we've been grappling with for 4 or 5 years now. Yeah.
Which must be frustrating after 5 years that we still sort of.
So question 6, starting again from the right. This appears to be more a statement than a question, so if someone can illuminate me on it. Huge developments in South Bank ignoring residents.
Okay, look, I'm going to ignore the obvious temptation to jump in here. I'm just realising that we're only starting from each end. So I'm going to, with your permission, moderator,
Please,
perhaps
sir.
invite another councillor who hasn't had a go to start off the answers. Jackie or Ken, would you like to take that?
It wasn't for that. I realise we're probably about halfway through, aren't we? So.
I guess this is a question for the chair of planning. The council introduced back in 2012 that every ministerial application will come to the Future Melbourne Committee. That is part of addressing the previous issues that residents don't know that something is happening until they read about it in the newspapers. I have to say that when I first became councillor, there were occasions when we didn't know what was happening until it's announced in the papers. Because the ministerial processes in those days was totally exclude the City of Melbourne. If we are asked a question and we say we don't like it, then we're excluded from the process. There are definitely huge developments going on. There has been. I would say that South Bank is now roughly 85% complete. I can name the specific sites that are not yet developed, because every single application now has to come to the City of Melbourne as an official referral, and then every Monday morning, council officers and the department's officers will meet to look at every ministerial application, and the applicants are invited in, and we'll tell them what they can't do, and to go away and get it redesigned, and we make sure that its information is available to the residents of Melbourne. So they are not ignored. However, as I said earlier, the planning scheme that's been put in place in South Bank, which is C171, about 5 years ago, and it started a few years before then. My commentary is when I came in and saw what was happening, and I said to officers, it's a little bit late. It should have been done 10 years before. Because planning schemes were done trying to predict what will happen in the future, but not really understanding what could happen. And there are other parts of the city where we didn't have a proper planning scheme, like Elizabeth Street, around Beckett and Franklin, and guess what's happened? It's totally out of control. So the city is now doing a strategic analysis of West Melbourne, including heritage, so that it doesn't happen again. And we had 2 forums with the residents, of which nearly 120 people turned up on each of those. And that's the process we are now implementing. Think ahead, get people involved, the residents involved, so we don't repeat the problems and mistakes of the past. South Bank is still a challenge. That's all I can respond.
Thank you, Ken.
Can I ask Councillor Ong can I buy him a couple of extra minutes and just to explain where we're up to on the developer contributions and open space contributions, because that's where areas like South Bank, where if we can actually get more money from the developers to pay for more open space or other community facilities, that's, we need to ramp that up.
Ken wishes to speak to it? Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Oak. This C208, Council tried a little process, planning scheme amendment for developer contributions. We already have what we call an open space contribution, where 5% of the value of the land, not the full development, but the value of the land is then paid to council for open space.
And we've been trying to increase that. That hasn't increased yet, has it?
No, it hasn't. We've been trying to increase it to 8%. In C209, I think, and in C208 is to put in something the equivalent of about $9,900 or $950 per apartment built as a contribution to community infrastructure. We were told that's not possible by the minister. So that failed as well. What has happened though is that as each development comes along, we try to sit down with the developer and say, you want to build something big in the city, in South Bank and Docklands. What can you contribute back to the community, to the city? Whether it's open space, whether it's community facilities like it's happening at Yarra's Edge, or improvement of streetscape around those areas, because that's the only mechanism we have. And I have to say that many developers have been pretty good to come and negotiate certain outcomes. Because we haven't been able to put it into the scheme. And because the government says no, and I can understand why, because the property industry is probably pushing pretty hard. It says, if you do that, it'll increase the price of apartments and creating an unaffordability problem. So, irrespective of that, I think adding $1,000 to an apartment is not going to make a huge difference to the developers. Fisherman's Bend has $19,500 per apartment developer contribution because they have a $500 million infrastructure shortfall over the next 25 years. But we do have major challenges in a really dense and growing city. Yearly population increase, 6,500 people. If you look at that, in 2014, we had nearly 11,000 people. The apartments, I keep track of all the development activity as my councillors do. We are seeing activities, 19,000 apartments under construction. 4,500 just completed in November. We have another 17,000 apartments in application, or actually approved, but not yet started, and 30,000 in the pipeline. But if we look 7 years ahead, at roughly that level, we need about 35,000 new housing units within the city of Melbourne to cope with the increase in population.
Thank you, Ken.
Why do you have to negotiate?
Can we leave the questions to the very end?
I'll answer that later.
So, thank you. Next candle for the round.
No more buying time, okay? You can use your own time. I'm not buying that.
No, I'm just going to share a really weird thing. And maybe you can answer it. I don't know what it is. When I heard about the residents group having an owners corporation special event a couple of weeks ago, I actually called the South Bank Residents Association to alert them to this opportunity, so that maybe they would like to go. And I was told by the South Bank Residents Association that they didn't have service department problem. And I can't understand why. They don't seem to have... Shane knows. Tell me, Shane.
Tony Penn is a short stay operator.
Jackie's naive. There you go. Depends who you ask, right?
If I can add to that, Jackie, we know that 35 to 40% of Southbank were built by Central Equity. And when they sell it, and the investors, they automatically also pass it on to Micom to manage it for them. So they don't really have a problem because they do have quite stringent requirements.
Thank you, Ken.
So many threads to jump on there, sorry. Central equity,
Just leave me
developers
alone,
lobbying
right?
government, getting rid of donations from the property sector, it would be a great thing with the elections, wouldn't it? Ban developer donations. But I was going to say, on a positive note, that the City of Melbourne, despite our frustration and not having... Yeah.
She's allowed.
Oh, by 1 minute, give me 1 minute. I was just going to mention that in South Bank, putting aside the frustrations and what we're not allowed to get in the conditions of buildings that we have no control over often, is that there are 2 big projects that are coming on board in the next, for the next financial year, where there has been, and I understand, I hope this is the case if you've been involved in it as a resident in South Bank, with City Road Master Plan will be released. I think it will be on a council agenda coming up in the next few weeks. So the master planning to getting that street level, the street level much better along City Road and South Bank, and also the South Bank Boulevard, massive new open space being planned in that area. So where we can, because we can't buy property, we're turning our streets into parks where we're able to, where we have control and Vic Roads doesn't. So there are a bit of retrofitting of green open space, much needed, without stating the obvious, in South Bank, and so council does have things coming along in the next financial plan.
Thank you, Kathy. Richard, your suck of the South.
Yeah, sure. Can I just buy Councillor Ong another minute? No, just
$2.
Geez, cheap at half the price. But, all right, Kathy raised a couple of good points. I wanted to touch on developer donations as well, and just draw your attention to that if it's not there already. Central Equity was a major donor to a campaign in the last term. It's something that we have to pay attention to, simply because you have to expect that there is going to be an expectation arising from that donation. I'll leave it at that. I think everybody in the room is smart enough to join the dots. In terms of South Bank specifically, I think we have to go back to what residents are telling us. We have to go back to listening to what residents want in the area. We know generally what makes a good community, and Kathy's touched on open space. It's crucial, absolutely crucial. Residents will tell us time and again that more open space is needed. We hear it around Dockland, certainly in the city, but South Bank is desperately crying out for open space. And as much as I agree with Ken that we've made efforts with this, with the state government, we haven't had the response from the minister that we might have liked. I think, as Kathy pointed out, there are other things that we can do as well. I think it's twofold. We should continue pressing the government of the day and the minister of the day with our ideas and our recommendations about what can be done in terms of a developer contribution to open space, but also take up those opportunities that we've had. I mean, there are real opportunities, as we've seen with the redevelopment of South Bank Boulevard. Acres of new open space created. Acres of new open space. The largest new open space created in Melbourne in years. This opportunity's been sitting there. You've got to go on the hunt for them, and you've got to be a little bit creative with what your outlook's going to be. So I think to do otherwise, look, you want to borrow the car on Saturday night. That's not all it's about. You've got to step up to it. You've got to start looking, realistically and creatively about what opportunities sit there in front of you.
Thank you. Now we begin the Q&A. A couple of rules. One is don't make it a statement, make it a question. If you wish to direct it to a particular councillor, please name the councillor. Also, when you're asking a question, could you please give your name? If a question's asked of a particular councillor, that councillor can answer it, and then if the other councillors wish to chip in on that question, they should feel free to do so. And we shall listen to each other in silence. Thank you. First question.
Good evening, my name is Graham. I'm from the Watergate complex. I'm a resident there. There's a number of questions I'd like to ask, but I'll start with one. You mentioned differential rates as a possible deterrent. My question would be that although it may act as a deterrent, it doesn't provide any financial compensation to the owners' corporation. And the owners' corporation has to address additional costs due to increased wear and tear. So I don't see that the differential is necessarily a good thing for the owners' corporation.
Now, as that question isn't directed to any particular councillor,
No.
I will just go eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
No, I was going to say, hence why it needs to be addressed by the Owners Corporation Act,
Yep.
which is, you know, where the state government can change that and not us.
Yes.
But the differential rate question was put to us to follow up to see whether it was even a mechanism, and then you guys can decide whether you want us to pursue that, I guess, through the budget process.
Okay, next question.
If I could
Oh, sorry.
just add to that, Chair, you're right. Putting a differential rate, which is actually the cents in the dollar, is not big enough to be a penalty from them, because they are filling a marketplace that currently is not provided sufficiently within the city. As the Chair of Planning, I'll give you another perspective to this. The City of Melbourne is now experiencing tourism that comes into the city, to the Melbourne airports, a 7 to 8% increase per month, international arrivals. The number of accommodation premises in terms of official service apartments and hotels, they are running at 86 to 88% occupancy. Anyone who is in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, knows that is unprecedented. It is incredible. The result is that we have been encouraging the industry to build more hotels and service apartments, and I can say that we have been partially successful. There are more and more coming online. As the official service apartment industry starts to grow, and they are much better managed, and the services are much better, I would hope that a lot more people will use these service apartments, because the properly managed service apartments in Southbank does not create a problem. And if we have much better service apartments across the city, hopefully what I call the rogue operators will soon find that their take-up is reduced. That is the hope as the Chair of Planning who's been pushing this particular agenda through the Property Council. And if I give you a brief on the number of service apartments that has been approved in the last 12 months or under construction, is 1,420 of them. And 3,270 have already received further approvals. So hopefully in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we'll have another 4,000 to 5,000 properly designed and managed service apartments available in the City of Melbourne. And that would be a good outcome. And soon the rogue operators will find that their customer base will shrink. Okay?
That question is a really good example of why we actually have to listen to people who live here. In that I hadn't leapt to that particular difficulty that you just highlighted. I'm not as optimistic as my colleague here about rogue operators, but we live in hope.
Notwithstanding, we still got to change the Owners Corp Act. No.
Oh, no, I was just going to say whether we're talking about rooming houses or not yet, because we also had some questions on that.
Next question.
My name is John Jackson. I'm the Owners Corporation Chairman for the Merchant. 2 questions. Have you considered getting real estate agents to hand out voter registration cards to people when they rent out property? That'd be one way at least getting them active. And secondly, if I can pay my rates online, why can't they vote online? That would save a lot of money.
I'd like to talk about that. I think it's an excellent idea. I've been in long and detailed conversation with our governance manager. I've been in there's a long string of correspondence between myself and the governance manager, banging on about various ways to engage the community. Quite a lot of pushback it seems. But I've noted what you said. I think it's a good idea. It's one of those kinds of things that we should go forward. As to whether we should be voting by electronically, I had a cup of tea the other day with somebody who's actually from Brazil, and it turns out you can, the whole of Brazil, how many, what's the population of Brazil these days? They all vote electronically. So it's the future, I think.
No, I've just noted that Richard's written it down, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. That's why we need you.
The first question, I don't trust real estate agents to do the right thing.
No offence to anyone in the room.
I have been dealing with real estate agents who've been advertising properties in the city of Melbourne to overseas investors, which basically tell lies. You know, if you look in the Fin Review and all those business magazines, you see the sites for sale, and 2 or 3 towers are described in the ad, potential development site. There's no approvals for such things. And people who are interested are encouraged not to do due diligence. That's the stupidest thing.
But I'm talking about when Barry Plant signs the rental agreement.
Yeah, I know what's right. So I've taken that. Second question on electronic voting, I'm a full advocate of that. I have, over the years, been the City of Melbourne's chair of disability, and that has been pushed very hard through the disability argument. And we seem to hit a brick wall to, I would say, the Victorian Electoral Commission. Their processes do not allow it. And you can't even get electronic voting for people with disabilities, let alone the rest of us.
And yet I can verify that I'm on the roll online.
I know. It's weird.
We can do our banking online, can do everything else online with 64-bit encryption and all that stuff. But we can't vote. So I'm fully supporting, and I think it will take someone in government to say, this is the way we're going to go.
What I was going to say, I've had a bit of success in relation to getting voter information out through the libraries. It seems to me that we've got to make it as easy as we can for people to register. They will vote if they're registered, I think. So we can only tinker with bits of it, and exposure is one of those bits through our libraries, and they're very well used. And so if you've got any other bright ideas, folks, for how we can engage people.
Sorry, well, because most of us live in apartment buildings.
Yes.
If you found I live in the building and I'm on the committee.
Yes.
If you had a central contact at every apartment building,
Which we do.
there's a way of getting all the residents, because I go around with 133 notices and put them in those boxes.
Right.
About voting.
Yes.
Like that.
Yes.
Councillors cut you to death.
Well.
I'm not talking about your property.
No.
I'm talking about
So get out and get yourself on the
road, getting the rest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next question, please.
Are you aware of the latest scam on the short-term exercise where somebody goes along and rents an apartment just in the normal way, particularly fully furnished apartments, but they don't have to be. They rent the apartment and then sublet it for 3 times the rent per week. And this is going on now, particularly in the state, but I'm sure it's going on in Melbourne as well. I've got 2 hotel interests in the state. And I know in buildings that we're involved in, where they're a mixed building, it's one of the scams that's going on there all the time up in Queensland at the moment, and it's a growing one. The differential rate one would fix that problem because of the landlord is not the person who is benefiting from this, it's the tenant who's benefiting from it. So as soon as the landlord's rates were put up, it would then be a disincentive. Somebody would have to dob them in, of course.
May I briefly butt in on this one?
Yes, please do.
You'll find under the Residential Tenancies Act that a tenant has the right to sublet. Well, more to the point, a landlord cannot reasonably refuse a request to sublet. There's long historic reasons on that, which I won't go into, but basically it is extremely difficult for a landlord to say no to subletting. If they do, the tenant has the right, as they should, to apply to VCAT to review that decision by a landlord. You'll find that very few landlords will say no anyway, because the rent they've charged is the rent that they think it's worth. If a tenant is bright enough to get more money out of it, then a great many landlords will take the view, well, good on them, and when the rent review comes up, we'll be putting up the rent because obviously I'm undercharged.
So if I may, Mr. Moderator, the solution appears to be an appropriate change to the Residential Tenancies Act to mirror this.
That is the only way it would come about, is by an amendment to the Residential Tenancies Act, and I think you would be, put it politely, pushing it uphill because of the disadvantage that may cause some residents, tenants, for example, if you've rented a place for 3 years, you're going overseas for a year, you've got a choice. You can sit there just paying the rent for an empty premises, or you can sublet to recover your costs.
But it wouldn't necessarily need to be a prescription against subletting in its entirety, would it? I mean, you could simply include it as a right of eviction if a tenant was found to sublet for profitable purposes such as these.
Well, see, I have no objection to people making a profit, and
Absolutely.
just as if there is a market need for certain types of apartments, such as service apartments, then the market will respond. If a landlord has underpriced their tenancy, that's the issue for the landlord. It's not the issue of the tenant, and I fail to see why the tenant should be penalised for a landlord underpricing their property.
The legal minds of the tax lawyers here might be able to answer this. If a tenant sublets to somebody else and makes a profit out of it and doesn't declare it, is it considered as income that's not reported? So you could probably dock them into the ATO. That's the only way to get them.
Next question, I think.
Hi, my name is Rose. My name is Rose Mercer. I live in.
We can hear though, we can hear.
You can use this one if that one battery is gone.
That's all right. I've got a loud voice. No problem. My name is Rose Mercer. I live in the Watergate. Question 3, I think, was about the weighting of votes. Thank you.
Thank you.
With residents getting 1 vote and businesses getting 2, you've all talked about that issue and have said it's quite unnecessary nowadays. My question is, what actually is being done to address this? Because you've all talked about it, but nobody's actually said, what are you doing?
They say they're on, but they're off. Sorry.
No, I can shout too. No.
So what are we doing about it?
We're actually, we can go back a few years if you'd like. Under the Napthine government, a review of the Act was called the Petro Georgiou Review, and we all made, those of us who care about these things and are reasonably knowledgeable, we all made very detailed submissions. 6 weeks before the election was called, the review findings came out, and they were not adopted because the election was in the offing. And the new government came in, and rather than adopt the recommendations from the Georgiou review, they thought, no, we're going to have another review. So that's what we're in the middle of at the moment, or not at the middle, towards the end. The Local Government Act is being reviewed, and we've pressed for the City of Melbourne Act, which, you know, our city is governed under a separate act to the rest of the state. We've pressed for reforms around just this matter and many, many others. Now, all of these submissions are online. You'll find, I think you'll find most of the residents groups have made submissions. I have made personal submissions. And this is the situation we're in. We're calling for a reform. We hope it will happen. Let's see.
May I also clarify that the response from the Georgiou review was that they called for the abolition of the 2 votes for business. So had the government continued, the situation may have changed.
Yes. Sadly, we're stuck again. For
So
another,
yes, it's,
another
they're
election.
revisiting it. So yes, that was a political comment on my part. And I believe Councillor Foster may wish to respond on behalf of the Party of Darkness.
Rose, thanks for your question. I think it highlights something really important on the back of what Jackie said. The Giorgio review came about largely due to the impact and pressure brought about by residents' groups. This can keep going. There's no reason that it should stop now. You know, my comrade, Mr. Moderator, was referencing a minute ago that there were a number of outcomes in that review, many of which we find quite favourable, and indeed the one that he mentioned being pivotal among them. I think, though, that to get these reforms enacted and to have them adopted as government policy, the pressure need not relax now. We've come so far, we've got some good outcomes in a review, but let's make sure that the government of the day is well aware of what your expectations are around that. The residents' groups was so effective in getting that review up to begin with. Look, they can be just as effective again with appropriate pressure placed on the current government. That's what needs to happen. It's the only thing that got us that far, so now with the change of government, we need to keep that going.
Just my understanding, but the noises from the current review, from the current local government minister, the 2 vote for 1 hasn't been mentioned at all. At the moment, there's only been a couple of things that have been on the table to be discussed within the electoral system, be that the information that's provided to all in the postal pack that comes out from the BEC. So at the moment it's suggested that the how to vote card wouldn't be included in the post pack as it has done in the past. And the second thing that's been suggested that's come out of the current review is the extension of the counting of the votes to 9 days after the 22nd of October to factor in Australia Post being incredibly slow, but even under the previous postal system, we were still getting, what was it, 6% of the 6%, I think, of the votes were received 5 days after.
The current reforms that have been, there have been 2 opportunities set by the current minister for us to give feedback in an interim way, and they both of these opportunities relate to various regulations, not the legislation itself. I've been to see the minister, in fact, several ministers, chiefs of staff, and I've been agitating for some months now, trying to get the review advanced in time. It wasn't possible, but what has happened is on 2 different occasions, regulation or regulatory changes have come out. Not enough, but it's something.
If I may also, I'll stand aside as moderator for a moment. Wearing my Corba hat. If you go to the Corba website, you will find the submissions that Corba made to the Giorgio review and the panel, the current 2015-2016 review of the present government. I urge you to go to Corba's website, corba.com.au or .asm, I can never remember. Look at them. Again, the Minister responsible, the Minister for Local Government, is Natalie Hutchins. If you have any views or submissions, I urge you to draw them to her attention. And the sooner, the better, and the louder, the better. You should also contact your local MPs, and who in the lower house is Ellen Sandell, in the upper house is Craig Ondarchi, and 2 Labor members and a Green whose name I can't remember. I apologise for that. It's not political bias on my part, it's just that I'm getting old and my memory's going. But yes, I urge you to read the Corba submission. Next question.
Yes, seeing I've got the microphone, I'll just go before you. I just have one comment and one question. Anyone that says self-regulation, a person that self-regulates can't follow the basic rules themselves, so how are they going to self-regulate for a start? The other thing I'd say is, we're all proud Melburnians, and we live in the city, we work in the city, we walk through the city, and we are the world's most livable city, as we have been for a number of years. My concern is, and I'm sure everyone here could relate to it, what is the council doing about people sleeping in doorways, sitting there begging, have their cup of latte, have their cigarettes, probably the Range Rover's parked up the road somewhere. But what are you doing about that? Now, we have heard from a resident that said they've contacted the council. The council says we can't do nothing about it. I don't accept that. I'm sure everyone else here doesn't accept it. The council should be having people out on the streets, moving these people on and moving them out of the city.
Richard, please.
Thank you.
Right up your alley.
All right, well, I'm the chair of the People's City portfolio, and this portfolio includes the issue of homelessness, so thank you for your question. I don't know if I'm going to tell you everything that you want to hear tonight, so I'm just going to be blatantly honest with you. The first thing I need to say is I don't accept the premise at all that a majority of people who are sleeping rough in the city have a Range Rover hiding around the corner. It is simply not true. And I don't want anybody leaving the room tonight thinking that the majority of people out there who are begging for money are in that situation. They are simply not. I know this from my conversations with the welfare services that we contract around the city, but also the ones who operate in the city without necessarily a direct relationship with the local government. I know it from my personal dealings. It is simply not the case. We do know though, and again, not to invalidate the point entirely, Marshall, I do know that there are a few, and we know who they are, and they're the ones that we tend to refer to police, and we don't tend to indulge other resources towards. Having said that, the problem of homelessness is a large one. I don't want to understate it. It's a huge one. There are numerous causes of homelessness, whether it be mental illness, drug and alcohol abuse, just people who slip through the cracks. It's interesting in some ways to note the number of Anglo men who don't have kids, don't have any mental illness, and don't have a drug or alcohol problem that end up sleeping rough. And you think, well, how did that happen? And it's simply because it may be really basic reasons, like they lost their job a couple of years ago, things fell apart at home, they left the house, had nowhere to go in the end, the savings dried up, and they found themselves on the street simply because there are no government services that pick up those ones that slip through the cracks. Those are becoming increasingly common too. So I guess what I'm trying to point out here is there are a lot of issues, a lot of causes of homelessness that local governments simply don't have the direct opportunity to respond to. We can't fix the inadequate mental health facilities across Victoria and indeed across the country. It's just not within our purview to do it. We can't fix all the causes of drug and alcohol problems. We can't fix domestic violence. But we have seen efforts made across all those things. And we need to continue the pressure for those efforts to keep going. Domestic violence has been responded to enormously well just recently. It's long overdue. It should have happened years ago, but we're getting there now. We will find flow-on effects from that. Hopefully we will see a decrease in women and kids sleeping rough because domestic violence services are being improved and because the issue is being identified far earlier than it ever has been and accepted for the traumatic issue that it is. I think we need to accept as a local government we can respond to the effects, to the way that homelessness manifests in our city, but I think the expectation that we start resolving the causes of it needs to be moved on from. I don't think that's reasonable at all. In terms of addressing the causes, look, we fund and work very closely with the Salvos, with Melbourne City Mission operating Front Yard, to work with people who are homeless for genuine reasons and to transition them through a homelessness experience. And I think that's one thing that we haven't always done in the past. We haven't always looked to transition. We've tried slapping the Band-Aid on, and then it tends to get torn off pretty painfully, pretty quickly, a little while later. We need to work towards sustainable transition. So as people end up becoming homeless, how do we work on their individual causes of homelessness and case manage them through and out the other side so that they don't remain homeless? There is no one-stop shop solution. I know it's not nice to see. I don't like it either. When I see somebody sleeping in a doorway or walk past a homeless person sitting out the front of a business, as much as I do feel for the homeless person, I also understand that there is a business operating there. And I know that that's not a good thing for the business owner. And it makes for a very difficult situation to resolve. It's hard to know sometimes who to feel more acutely sorry for, although at the end of the day, you've got to look at the homeless person. And you've got to say, well, I don't want to be in either of those situations, least of all the one that has to sleep in a doorway. So we have to understand both sides of the issue. We have to understand that local government doesn't have the solution to all the causes of homelessness. We have to understand that the only way for a local government to respond is by adequately funding local services to deal with people who find themselves homeless, to work with them personally on a case management basis, to move them out of that, to get them off the street, out of the doorway, out of a situation that's going to be impacting a business negatively, and indeed impacting themselves negatively. Let me tell you, who would choose to be homeless? You know, the conversation about, you know, people who choose to be a rough sleeper just has to end. I mean, there is no solid basis to it. Apart from those handful that we do know about, there is no solid basis to the majority of those allegations. We need to be serious about homelessness to the extent that we do actually meaningfully resource local services to be able to work with those individuals, case manage them through the problem, and stop seeing them sitting on our streets. Nobody likes it, but just bear in mind, the person who likes it least is the person who's homeless.
If I could add to this conversation, it's true, local government hasn't got a lot of power or resources to do this. Now, some of us have spent time down at City Mission in King Street and talking to the people there and getting understanding. One of the biggest problems is emergency accommodation, housing. And if you look at it, successive state governments for many years now, and including the most recent budget, has $0 in for additional social housing. Some cities around the world, if you do some research, you'll find that I think in Canada, it's either Toronto or Ottawa. The local government has to put in $5 or $10 million to encourage the regional and provincial government to build these things. But what's happened here in Victoria, in Australia, is this. Government has not built a single extra social housing unit. It's using the planning scheme to make private developers build them into the apartments they're building. I don't think that's a solution. The industry will push back because some will consider it as unworkable because of the mixed nature of the apartment. And I can tell you, government has basically handballed this. The City of Melbourne is the end result. We are the magnet. All the services are based in the city, people will come here. When I look at people sleeping rough and beggars on the doorways, I feel sorry for them. But when I put on my hat as chair of Disability Services, all of them are breaking the rules on the Disability Discrimination Act. Because under the rules, you will see in the city, all cafes are on the curbside. Reason why? People with disabilities, especially those who are visually impaired, needs the wall of the buildings as part of their movement capabilities. So every single one of those have broken the law. But because it's such a situation which is so sorrowful, none of us dares to say anything about it. And that's, we as council have been, a lot of people complain to us, why don't you do something about this? And I think Richard's correct. Our hands are tied, and it's been handballed to the council to solve a problem that it did not create. Now I'll put this, and we take on an earlier comment. We, the council, can advocate a lot more strongly back to state government. Take responsibility for the problem. Do something about it. Put some real resources and money into it. You know, because if you look at the housing, the social, or the what I call social housing, we don't quite call it that, in North Melbourne, in Flemington, in Carlton, and other locations. There's actually a lot of space there to build more. But in Carlton, we have built commercial on them. Why don't we use those spare land to build more housing for people who need it, who can't afford it? And that's my view. Because I think council can stand up and scream at governments. Take responsibility for something that is actually within your role. We have ministers to do that.
Look forward to a motion. Very soon.
I've been working on those things.
Good. Only very briefly, because I'm not sure if we're going to do a follow-up bill. Yeah. Because yeah, I agree, and I really appreciate all the comments that have already come through, but I know that on your specific situation, I think that I apologise because when you came to council the other day, there's a series of emails that I've been following up with someone else who's dealing with a similar situation, and there's a residents' business meeting that happens on a regular basis that Councillor Foster Richard will know way more than I do. And I apologise because when I said, oh, I've just got your email, but I believe it's not from you, and I don't think I do have an email from you with the specific information. So I would encourage you to send.
As I'm listening to this, you do all know, don't you? My advice to you would be not to ever just write to the Lord Mayor. Always copy in all of the councillors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's good advice.
Yeah, and then we decide among ourselves who's going to put their hand up.
So, I believe you have a supplementary question.
I have a different question altogether. I'm going to hijack the whole thing. I know that we live here. My name's David Silcock. We moved here in August last year. We moved into the Nolan building, which is down on Victoria Harbour there. Sorry, Harbour Town. I would like to ask the panel, are they aware that from north of Collins Street, there's all these super stops for trams all the way through, which is lovely. We have a son who's 32 with cerebral palsy who can't walk or talk, and he can't. He has to go everywhere by public transport. Anything north of Collins Street, there is not one tram that goes down to Harbour Town. Not the 70, the 35, the 86, the 70, 30.
Correct.
I work at RMIT. He cannot get on that one. Now we moved in, and I've been agitating for a long time. I've contacted PTV twice, Public Transport Victoria, and have been told that by 2032, after I die, it'll all be accessible for wheelchair people. I then contacted the Premier directly, who has now put them to other people, and told them about this problem. The other problem is that is the council also aware that under their access map, they show them accessible tram stops. Not one of them has a sign saying there are no trams that stop here for an older person, a person with a disability, a lady with a pram, little kids. There is nothing. Our son, on a day like today, when it's pouring with rain, he gets to walk to Southern Cross and get on a train, which he can do once he's in his chair. But I get to walk 50 metres to a tram and go to work. So are the council aware of this, or is this something that...
Completely aware, sorry, and I would love to get your details. I'd love for you to write that letter, what you just said to me, because over a year ago now, the council unanimously requested Yarra Trams and PTV to talk to us and the community in a fully organised engagement process about where the stop should be, when they should be, and if they're going to remove one, what are the impacts on our community. And they are yet to do that. And I have had my last 3 meetings cancelled. There's no money in this budget for new tram stops in the CBD. There's no money for this plan. And I'm asking for this meeting, I've been told, anyway, I mean, I know a lot of money's being redirected from Metro Rail, and that is a great project, and it's excellent that it's going ahead. But
the other thing too is when the tennis is on, they can go from Flinders Street around the 70 and stop just around the corner, but they won't go any further. So it's okay for tennis time.
No, really encourage it. We've had a lot of issue at the City of Melbourne having dialogue with Yarra Trams and PTV about issues that are really important to our residents, and accessibility to tram stops is one of them. But changing tram stops and moving them around in the CBD is of great importance not only to residents but obviously to businesses.
I did also contact the council and contacted the people who drew up the access map and asked them whether they're aware of this. They said, no, there's no problem. I said, there is a problem. There are no trams. And they advised my son to go to the...
Walk 800 metres or...
No, they said, oh, pop into the Travellers Aid and talk to them, they'll help you out. And that was the council.
Flinders Street Station.
Well, Flinders Street and Southern Cross.
But please, I mean...
The council actually said,
Right to us
Yeah,
all.
that's the only response I have.
Yeah.
Right to the Lord Mayor, right to us all.
No.
Copies of This is not to stop.
Yeah, no, and it's a really important issue to all of us, and as you said, we had to do by motion a please come and meet with us and talk to us about these issues and allow us to have a regular dialogue, and we've had quarterly meetings set up, and we've had one or two of them, and I have, this week, so I'm just angry this week, because this week in particular, I'm like, no, you know, it's not good enough to say that all the money is going to Melbourne Metro. Sorry, I'm not helping you, but you will help me by giving me that information, and I will send it to the Director of Communications at Yarra Trams, and I'm sure that she will be glad to receive that information.
Being mindful of the time, we have time for one last question.
I'd love to ask this one, and it affects everybody in the room, everybody, especially anybody over the age of about 50. What on earth is happening with the lack of public toilets in Docklands? We have got a situation where the planning people are making them put them in the private buildings that are going up, and after they've been up there for a year, they then lock them off after hours, and because in the weekends, particularly the cafes aren't open or anything like that, and in many cases the cafes don't have toilets, they point you down the road, and the public toilet down the road is locked off for people in this building only, commercial businesses and so on. They're about to put a ferry in, right opposite Dock 5, outside my front door, and there will be hundreds of people a day going down to Wyndham on that ferry, and there is not a dunny down there. And if you get caught short in Docklands, you've got no choices.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be over 50.
That sounds just like something for Ken.
Actually, it's not really for me, but I'll give a bit of history. Those public toilets in Docklands, especially in waterfront city harbour town, were open. Then the party boats started dislodging a lot of people. And then the public toilets all along that harbour town area were badly damaged. And then eventually the owners closed it to the public, because they were actually private buildings that allowed the public to use. That's the history of it.
But there were a planning permit requirement on those buildings to have the public toilets available, and now they've turned them off. That's a breach of council requirement.
That's the correct thing, but I think when we had tried to address this a few years ago, and then the building owners were saying, who's going to pay for all the damage every weekend? That's one of the challenges, because the planning permit says you've got to do this. But then the responsibility on the owner is that it costs them a hell of a lot of money to keep them open. So I think if I look at the regulation, and there's also got to be practicality, you know. The council hasn't built public toilets per se, that we built these, what do they call these, silver capsules, which cost 350,000 each. It's mind-boggling. I'm not sure what they can do and can't do. But if I take seriously your issue there, that's true. The only ones that are actually open are in the harbour town, but not along New Quay, because mostly they belong to
I'm
apartments.
talking the other side.
Which part are you talking about?
The other side of Victoria Harbour.
Oh, in Victoria Harbour as well. I think it's the same situation.
It is.
No, it is the same
And they've just
situation.
locked the ones in Merchant Street in the main shopping centre. There's no, here we've got Merchant Street as being the shopping centre, and you have no toilets open to the public.
I'll take that on, the question on board, back to our building department to look at these things. I'm not sure whether we can resolve that. If not, then I'll talk to engineering to work out something else.
No, but the planning permits specify public toilets in those buildings, and they have been locked off. So each one of the buildings that's locked it off is now in breach of its planning permit.
We will take that on notice and get back. But the
Sounds
two,
very
there are two Docklands items in the annual plan that I'm encouraging you to make submissions on, and one of them is around the Docklands Community and Place Plan, and one of them is also about a business activation strategy for the Docklands and around events. I think there are two items that are on the agenda where you've got the ability to make submissions on what you've just said should be.
Well, we've got the ferry going to start shortly, and that ferry holds a couple of hundred people each. And if it's pretty successful, which I think it may well be, because Wyndham getting from there to the city is very difficult at the moment, as we all know. And what are we going to do with them there? If somebody gets caught short, what are they supposed to do? Hang it over the edge of the harbour?
I take your point on board. What you say that in the Docklands is a planning permit condition. Personally, I find that very unusual. No other private apartment building in the city, in the South Bank, has public toilets.
No, it's true, I agree, I
No,
know.
but in Docklands, because until 2011, all planning permits were issued by Vic Urban or Places Victoria. Because I can tell you, every single apartment building in the city that has come across my desk in the last 5 or 6 years, there is no requirement to have a public toilet in a private apartment.
So the council have to build them there, don't they?
Correct. The council builds them in South Bank, near the parks, where we have a war about where it should be, but we build them. We tried to build one in Faulkner Park a few years ago, and it turned out into a local war as well. And the one on Gatehouse in Parkville. So it's not easy to build these silver bullets. But your point is taken, and I'll take it back to council. It had to go into as a budget bid, probably.
Go on, Kathy.
No,
Last
not
word.
to comment, or to clarify, just through the organiser, because there's been a couple of questions we're taking on notice. Do we compile them and send them to the organisers who will send them to the
Email your
website?
responses to Barbara? Yes.
You've got that.
So that's the answer. Oh,
Is
we'll
it
be kind.
titled one?
One
more
little one,
comment?
very
One
small
more.
one. Because I'm kind.
No need for a microphone. We love your signs over on New Quay that say, go slowly, bike people. But seriously, it is very, very sad to be walking along with people that are, their dogs, I've seen their dogs covered in blood, and people being knocked over. I spoke to a lady today and she said, I will only walk along very close to the buildings because the bikes are just whooshing through them. The signs,
Yes.
the signs do not make any difference.
They're a target by ankle.
Personally, Harbour Esplanad's a raceway.
Yes.
It's a raceway.
It is.
Now, it's dangerous. It's not even something that needs to be debated. It is a walkway or it's a bikeway.
Let's take that on those two. Both would be good.
So,
Council insurance will have to be well paid up when it hits, when the accident happens.
And they
It'll
are
be a really bad
they are being
Councillor and I differ on these things. I have a difference of opinion because I have been quite critical about cyclists in the city going at high speed. It's 6 blocks long and wide.
Yeah.
What's the rush, I always say.
I think it's a bit unfair. I think Councillor Oak doesn't want
No.
dangerous
But there's,
cycling either.
she likes to promote safe cycling, and we all do. However, one of the problems we faced is the speeding. And if you go back to 2009, I think there was a notice of motion that suggested we should slow down the speed in the city for bicycles to 20 kilometers an hour.
that wouldn't hurt if they hit you.
From the current about 30 to 40, I think I still have it in my email, documented 120 death threats to run me over. Yes, I still got that. Rochelle's got that. But I can tell you this, we got too many conflicts. It's great that the number of cyclists in the city is increasing. You know, we're talking active transport. I think the thing is education and respect needs to be improved.
I would have to say skateboarders are just pretty scary too.
But I ride there often, but I think that given there is an alternative way that you can ride on the safe bike path, I think there is merit in looking at that as the shared pedestrian space.
But there's
as
no
part of the
bike
walking
track
track.
there.
No,
It's a
that's right, it's a
free-for-all.
free-for-all.
People are just whizzing through walkers and
No, I think
you
it
know, and it's
merits
not
looking
waiting
at
for
it
an
as a
accident to
pedestrian
happen.
zone
Yeah.
because there is an alternative bike lane. There are some areas where it's difficult because there's absolutely no other way, but I think that merits looking at it as a pedestrian zone, and I'll speak.
is something going to be done about it? I mean, the signs were put down, but nothing's changed.
Councillor Oak, we'll give Councillor Foster 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'll need even less. I just wanted to say, I think it calls for, speed mitigation by design a lot of the time, and I don't think that's too much to ask for. But is it possible that they're just racing to the nearest toilet, given that that's some distance away?
And on that happy note, I will hand over.
You're talking about the cyclists.
Thank you all.
The ice cream. It's about the ice cream.
Because we could charge double commercial rates for service departments and pay for the toilet. And it's homelessness into the bargain. So thank you, Councillor Richard Foster, Councillor Jackie Watts, Councillor Ken Ong and Councillor Kathy Pope. And thank you very much to Michael Kennedy for mediating.
Well done.
Congratulations
interested in
on,
running council? Please pick up one.
on a very good Logie winning performance. And, I'm a councillor, get me out of here. So, just a little bit about. Okay, sorry about that. We Live Here, who's organised tonight. So, we now have over 100 apartments represented in the movement, and it is a growing movement, not only in Melbourne but in New South Wales and Queensland. So it will be a national movement, and we'd encourage you to join. There are now 25 buildings in South Bank, 24 in Docklands, 29 in the CBD itself. So there's buildings all over the place. There's people everywhere who are very interested in joining this movement. So as you can see, we're covering a lot of issues, and about living in this city, the most livable city in Melbourne, and how to make it stay that way. So we'd encourage you to join up in the movement. You can go to our site at welivhere.net. Currently there's a petition on to protect residential community living from short stay, the short stay invasion. So if you could sign that petition, that would be great. And I'd like to also thank our sponsors, Capital Green Solutions, Kingston Management, STL, and the Insurance Services Management Private Limited, as well as Watergate, for supporting this. If you know any sponsors who can support us, please let them know that there's an opportunity here to get some exposure to a large group of residents nationally, and so it's a worthwhile investment as a commercial operator in this community. I'd also like to acknowledge some people who've contributed a lot of hard work as well, digitalstorytelling.com and Chubb Insurance for their support. And please sign up at the site, and thank you very much to the panel again. Thank you, Michael, and please join us for refreshments. There's also a very convenient some iPads set up there to take donations. And it's a very painless operation. You swap your card and it's very quick. So if you would like to make a donation, we'd very much appreciate it. And Councillor,
excuse me.
They've taken your mic now.
No, it's all right. I can speak loud enough. We've been sitting here fielding questions. Now, can I ask a question back? We've all moved into the city of Melbourne, some longer than others, and live in the city mostly in apartments, I assume. Mostly. Do you think you have a great city?
Yes.
Yes. So our job is to make sure it still remains great. So I think it's very important that, I wanted to get that question out now.
Can I say no, I don't think we have. It's going to end up like Manhattan.
I think it's going down till...
All right. I think that's a very important response, because then it has to feed back into our own council strategic thinking. And you know that we are doing the plan 2017 to Future Melbourne 2026, which looks at the future. And I think we will be bringing that to council to go out to the public in the near future. I suggest that take that opportunity to also feed into that future strategy, because we don't have the answers. We actually have an independent jury who's helping us with that.
And it goes to the point we've been making all along. Speak up. Let us know what's going on. Let us know what you're thinking.
Good.
Whatever way you want to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think you make all sorts.